As Chairman said, working in Suffolk, Cambridgeshire and West Essex, we've been at the forefront of cabbage stem flea beetle and drought this year, so you've got two people really well qualified how to take the risk out of rape, having lost probably 3/4 to 2/3 of their rape crops between them. But the one thing we can hopefully do with that is give you some lessons and pointers about what's been successful in establishing rape in pretty tough conditions for us over the last 2 years. Firstly, a little bit about prime agriculture. We're a partnership of 10 agronomists working in East Anglia, established in 2006, providing independent agronomy on 90,000 hectares, and at last count, somewhere around 17,000 hectares of that was oilseed rape. Our aim is really to be part of the management team on the farm, maximising financial contribution from the arable business, driving the profitability of the arable business, and I think above all nowadays, maintaining the sustainability of the arable business as well. So we all know 2016 was risky. This is an AICC survey that was done in October, and it surveyed approximately 10% of the UK crop. And that survey showed that when you extrapolated it up, that around 70,000 hectares of this year's crop in the UK is estimated to be lost at establishment. And you can see that's pretty much balanced between dry weather and cabbage stem flea beetle. Myself, when I filled the survey in, found it pretty difficult to ascertain which was which if the seed had got out of the ground. Obviously, if the seed hadn't got out of the ground, you knew it was drought. And you can see, obviously, droughts had a huge effect on those counties in the southeast there. When you look at soil moisture deficit grids for the end of October, you can see in mine and Andrew's part of the world, we're running at over 100 millimetres of soil moisture deficit at the end of October. So what's happened to the oilseed rape area in the last few years? You can see we reached dizzy heights of about 750,000 hectares in 2012, and I think by the time it all comes out in the wash, harvest 2017 will probably be no more than 500,000 hectares. By the time we've lost, I suspect we're going to lose some more rape as well. There's some pretty backward and small crops out there. Myself, as I said, I feel solely responsible in some ways across a pretty constant advised arable area. I've dropped from just under 3,000 hectares of oilseed rape in harvest 2014, and I suspect I'm going to end up down to somewhere around 500 hectares of oilseed rape this year. So yeah, we've lost an awful lot in the east this year. Now, oilseed rape, as it's already been alluded to, it's all about upfront risk. This is a snippet out of our gross margin booklet we do for our customers every year, and you've got in that booklet you've got a growing cost somewhere in the region of £500 a hectare or just above for oilseed rape. If you add that on to use sort of pre-textbook standard figures of sort of £400 to £500 a hectare for actually fixed costs for getting that crop to harvest, you can see by the time you've got to August, it's costing you £900 a hectare. If you lose your crop in October, you're going to lose probably around about 1/4 to 1/3, getting on for a half if you write your crop off in December. And I think the worst sin of all is writing the crop off in February when you've spent getting on for 2/3 of growing that crop as well. So part of the risk is about, it's sad to say, but it's about knowing when to give up as well. Why do we want to grow oilseed rape? Well, economics, again from our gross margin booklet, you can see £530 a hectare gross cost. You might argue a bit that's up and down depending on, apologies for the overlap at the bottom there, but you've got going across, you've got a mediocre rape crop, the output at 2.5 tonnes a hectare at 375. You've got then 3.5 tonnes a hectare, then 4.5 tonnes a hectare. And basically the 4 columns on the right are the pulses, anything else, and linseed, anything else you can put an average yield and today's price through the anything else you can put through the head of a combine as a break crop. And you can see that's why everyone's interested in growing oilseed rape, because even at mediocre yields, the potential for profit is there. And obviously if you get things right, which we hope you do, there's a huge potential for increased profit compared to the other break crops just by multiplication of a high sale price. So aside from economics, it's an early entry for wheat, gives you increased combining capacity. In turn comes increased primary cultivation workload time, reduced primary cultivation possibilities as well with minimal tillage and direct drilling. And I've put brackgrass control question mark there. There is the opportunity, but you've got to get that right as well, and we'll discuss that a bit more in a moment. So why is it failing and falling? Establishment risks. I'll talk predominantly about these as we're in the establishment section. I'll just mention briefly the post-establishment risks. Establishment risks that we've seen this year, the primary ones being weather, cabbage stem flea beetle, and slugs. Post-establishment risks really, grazing, other grazing pests, poor weed control, blackgrass in particular I think, and disease and lodging. Other insect pests, pollen beetles, seed weevil, etc. And obviously weather can continue to play a part as you go through the year, through waterlogging during winter, frost at flowering, hail when the crop is ripening. So let's take weather quickly. You've got to be able to have a system that deals with variability. And just very briefly, if you look at August over the last 3 years, these are the anomalies from the 25-year mean. You can see that temperature at the top, rainfall at the bottom. In the last 3 years, we've had everything from hot and dry to cool and moist and every combination in between. So you don't really know what you're going to get. And that rolls on into September as well. And you see September 2016 there, particularly in the very southeast corner, extremely hot and dry. And there's no reason to say that the August trend follows the September trend either. So you've got to have that system that can deal with the variability and that can cope in both the wet and the dry. This is all made easier, following on nicely from Andrew's talk, this is made up so much easier if the soil structure is correct for the oilseed rape crop. And we'll come on to discuss at the moment by making it correct before the oilseed rape crop, because oilseed rape is probably one of the smallest seeds you plant on the farm. Doing that remedial cultivation immediately ahead of the rape crop is not ideal. Ideally, it wants to be done, I would say, 12 months ahead of the cereal crop, and then looking how you treat the field going ahead, so the structure's then right 12 months later to get a nice, healthy structure. So how do you cope in dry weather? Moisture retention and low disturbance, one-pass systems and direct drill systems are the key, I believe. My able companion Fred here, not only when he goes into a seed bed that's colloquially known as the RAF method, if you don't know what that is, speak to me later, I'll tell you, but not only does he get cruciate damage walking across that, he has to put up with me moaning to him as we walk across that. That was this summer on one of my farms. That is not the ideal place to put an oilseed rape seed. It's served us well for the past 20 years. I think these subsoiler, subcast systems, sprinkling a small seed on, but when you get a dry year like this, it's just a high road to nothing. Picture down the bottom right there is more what you need. Car keys there, you can see a little tiny cotyledon oilseed rape plant emerging from tilth on heavy land. That's more what we're looking for. Soil to seed contact is essential, so tilth in other words. Experiment with your machinery setup. Just like Andrew was saying, there's not necessarily the need to go out and buy a whole new machine. If you've got subcasters that on your farm that have got big tines and big legs on, there's a whole plethora of manufacturers out there that make different tines, different size wings for the machines, etc. I'm sure some of them are here. Go and investigate it and look at the opportunities for running those machines shallower or lower disturbance tines. Experiment with the machine you've got. You might have the right setup at home. It might be as simple as lengthening a top link a bit, or dropping the legs, or notching the legs up a pin. Or there are all sorts of things you can do. But be prepared to experiment and go out and play on a piece of fallow ahead of drilling your oilseed rape before you start drilling. Rapid consolidation is the key, and the one lesson I would say here in a dry year, if you think you need another consolidation pass, have I quite done enough? The answer is usually yes. Do I need another one? The answer is usually yes. Go out and do another one. But again, if the press is a field away and you walk into the field and think that hasn't done enough, get them back. Do a round in the field and run over it and see what it's like. Do you chop or remove the straw? Generally, in a dry year that we've just been through, good even straw spread and a chop I think has been beneficial because it's acted as a mulch, retaining the moisture. In a wet year, I think removal of straw is better because it actually removes the slug haven from underneath the straw. Consider the need for residual weed control in a dry year. There's the big thing obviously with residual weed control, particularly broadleaf weeds or preems, is following crops if you have to write the crop off. And obviously there are one or two new options out there in the pipeline in a can coming forward that give you more post-emergence options, and there's another option we'll talk about briefly in a little while as well. Deal with your volunteers early. Be prepared to take them out of the 1 to 2 leaf stage, and be prepared to treat again if necessary. They're the greatest robber of moisture and establishing oilseed rape back in dry conditions. And finally, don't forget slugs in dry conditions either. Generally, I would say on the heavy land, if there's enough moisture for the rape to grow, there's enough moisture for the slugs to be active. So, and think about your choice of active ingredient as well. And finally, if it's really too dry, do you irrigate? I think this has been an expensive lesson to some in the east this year. Irrigation really is wakey. It's huge cost. The management starts the day you switch the irrigator on. The slugs will come up within 24 hours. Weed control has to start. They'll germinate as soon as the soil moistens up. Cabbage stem flea beetle saw this year on a couple of my farms where we irrigated. No one else has got any rape up. All of a sudden, every cabbage stem flea beetle in the whole parish comes your way. So, and just bear in mind, this is a big one. Every pull of the irrigator is a different crop. Sure, I've seen a few nodding heads around the room. It takes a long while to pull an irrigator up a field, and it can be 24 hours. That's a different crop in my mind with regards to timing for slug control, weed control, cabbage stem flea beetle. So you've got to question whether irrigation is worth it. And on this particular farm of mine, we emptied that reservoir. We got every cabbage stem flea beetle in the area. We lost the oilseed rape at a huge cost. Wet weather briefly, I think this is a bit easier. Keep establishment passes to a minimum for obvious compaction reasons. Tilth and soil to seed contact are less important. Consolidation is still important. Obviously the big one is slugs. Choose your slug pellet active ingredient and formulation carefully. Think about which actives are better in the wet. There's plenty of information out there today. You can go on the stands and talk to them about which active ingredients are better in the wet. Think about which pellet formulations are more durable in the wet while still remaining palatable to the slug. Think about how many baiting points you get in and how far do the pellets generally spread. I see it a number of times where even where people have spreading machines calibrated, they run in a field and they're not actually spreading to the full width of what they're expecting to, and you lose rape up strips. And finally, with slug pellets, consider banding as well. I think it's not actually in with the seed in the soil, but banding on top behind where you've cultivated as well to target pneumatically those slug pellets in a zone. It get better efficacy and better environmental protection. And let's say there's data out there. This is a sheet that's put together by Chris at Anglia Farmers, showing you the different active ingredients, the way they're formulated, how many baiting points you get. And on the right-hand side, I've kindly deleted it, but there's a section on cost as well, so you know what you're getting for your money. Cabbage stem flea beetle. These are all damage pictures that I've seen on my farms this year. The big question, I think, on the little bit of rape area that I've got left is this going to transpire into the larval damage that we saw this last spring, just gone, which absolutely decimated crops. Once you get it through the winter, it's only half the story, as we know. The damage then comes in the spring with a larval invasion. And I think, is cabbage stem flea beetle now too hot in some areas? It gives you patchy crops. Weed infestations come from those patchy crops. Gives you uneven ripening, mediocre yields, and I think above all it propagates it even further for the following year. So in some of my areas now it is too hot to handle, but can I give you any lessons with regards to establishing crops and fighting cabbage stem flea beetle for those of you where it's still only a moderate or minor pest? So mitigating the risk. Be prepared to drill when the conditions are right. Drill early, drill late, but when you feel the conditions are right, just bear in mind the other agronomic factors that will knock on to. For instance, drilling early will promote other pests potentially. It will give more time for weeds to flush, and it will promote other diseases such as verticillium wilt, or if you've got an early crop away in the autumn, there's more time for phoma and light leaf spot spores to land on the crop. Attention to detail is everything, as we've said. Make sure you have a good soil structure before you drill, and that's not, as I said, that's not rectifying immediately ahead of the oilseed rape crop. Seed still needs to go into tilth, you still need to consolidate, and you still need to maximise moisture retention. Variety choice. Choose a variety that's got good autumn vigour and good spring vigour to get away from the larvae. The data's out there. It's not out there in a standard form on a recommended list, but chat to your agronomist, chat to the breeders. There's data out there on how vigorous varieties are. I won't get into the hybrid and conventional debate. There's vigorous varieties of each, but you say chat to the breeders. Starter fertiliser is essential. I think with your phosphate and your potash, aim to have your indices right before you even think about establishing the oilseed rape crop. And with your fertiliser, if you're banding it, you've got the option to perhaps treat a third of the field up your strip, which means you can triple your NVZ legal amount for nitrogen, so you get more in the active growing zone of the plant. Check crops for damage as they begin to emerge, and remember, cabbage stem flea beetle is a small target, just like blackgrass. Treat it the same. Think about the target you're after, think about the time you're spraying and if they're active. And where the threat is where you're on the edge of hotspot areas and still growing rape, perhaps consider reducing your area to more smaller manageable areas, and look at the length of rotation you're growing it on as well, to enable you to perhaps not have to do what some of my growers are doing, backing out of the crop, but enables you to have a smaller area moving forward. So these are some of the old systems we've seen that put seed in at any kind of depth, really, on a subcast system behind the oilseed rape crop. That's not ideal because your rape doesn't all flush at one time. It flushes over perhaps a week period because it's coming up from anything from 1.5 inches to 1/4 inch deep, and that's heaven for a pest that likes small cotyledon plants. So what we're looking for, really, this is a machine that one of my farmers built. It's basically got a small Simba type SL tine on the front. He's married that up to his rapide drill at the back, and he's basically putting two close together coulters along his strip tilled area, sort of 50 centimetres apart, and with those disc coulters he's putting the seed in the ground at an even depth so it flushes evenly when it comes. And the hopper on the front is putting DAP down. That may equally be liquid. There's a commercial version you can buy. That's the type of effect you get. Andrew had something similar from what he put up on his screen, and that's hopefully the type of effect you get with a crop. I've done a brief comparison there. I'll very briefly go through this. It's a green's good, amber's moderate, red's bad. They're my takes on the system. Obviously a plough and drill's bad for moisture retention. The sort of cultivation train and seeder I think are probably are okay for moisture retention. Bad for slugs because they give them somewhere to live. Bad for broadleaf weeds because residual herbicides don't work on them. Bad for blackgrass because that germinates from any kind of depth. And obviously with propyzamide, carbetamide, you want shallow germinating blackgrass. And again, bad for cabbage stem flea beetle because they've got somewhere to live in the cobbly lumps and things in the seedbed. The low disturbance type system with banded fertiliser and banded slug pellets, better for moist retention, better for slugs and cabbage stem flea beetle because they don't have the environment they want to live in. Broadleaf weed I've put an amber because I think obviously you've got quite a bit of trash laying about, so perhaps the residual broadleaf weed chemicals don't work quite as well. And blackgrass I've put good for because it's all shallow emerged blackgrass under that system, which is far easier to control. Very briefly a bit on post-emergence weed control because that all rolls on from establishment really. Blackgrass, as I've said, think about the system you're doing. Aim for a lower disturbance system that promotes shallower blackgrass germination and easier control of residuals. Broadleaf weed, wait until you see whether you have a crop, is not an option. It propagates in particular on heavyland charlock, cranesbill, cleavers. They all get away as post-emergence options for those products are not good at present. There may be one or two options on the way, so take the opportunity to control those broadleaf weeds in the cereal crops ahead of the oilseed rape, where there's plenty of options available. There is new technology, well I say new, it's been around for a few years, Clearfield, which probably is a similar cost to buying oilseed rape seed onto the farm. The varieties are getting far better, and what that also enables you is to put a post-emergence treatment on a good post-emergence treatment on your crop once it's up and away by the selective herbicide abilities that Clearfield give you. And finally, don't be tempted to keep patchy, thin crops, 1 year seeding, 7 year weeding, etc. We've had all the sayings this morning, Andrew, and obviously not to mention the cost. So finally, conclusions, very briefly. Attention to detail is everything with establishing oilseed rape. Now, gone are the days of sprinkling it on behind a subsoil or onto lumpy seed beds. Flexibility is the key. Be prepared when to drill or not to drill even, and that might be you might get through to the end of August, early September in the southeast and think, no, I'm not going to drill, but just be prepared to have that flexibility. Good soil structure is essential. Good soil to seed contact is essential. Minimise disturbance and moisture and maximise moisture retention. Take time to set your machinery up and experiment with the machinery you've got on the farm. It may be that you don't need a whole new setup. Look at options for different legs and wings on the legs, etc. Experiment with your press and your rolls as well, not only number of times you do them, the way you've got them set up. Some of you might have levelling boards on your rolls and the tines on your presses and things. Experiment with those and play around. And so, do you need to review your setup, and do you need to buy a whole new setup? The answer to the first question is probably yes, and the second question, no. With the establishment pests, cabbage, stem, flea beetle and slugs, well, pests need three things. They need, pretty much like us really, they need a mate to breed with, something to eat and somewhere safe to live. They provide the first, obviously. The crop provides the second. The only one you have any option in is not giving them somewhere to live. So get good seed beds, get consolidation, don't give them that place to live. Choose varieties carefully, don't just go for the highest output on the list. Look at vigour, look at disease ratings, speak to the breeders. There's hundreds of new varieties every year. Not everyone makes it to the list. The variety you're looking for might not be on the list. Have a good look around. And finally, get your crop nutrition right from the start. Get your P and K right, and ideally put nitrogen banded in the seed bed either before the crop or immediately as you drill the crop. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Andrew. We've got time for just a couple of quick questions to Andrew on oilseed rape, or indeed any establishment, before we wrap the session up. So any questions quickly, please. There's a microphone coming around, I think, John.
Thank you very much, Andrew, for the presentation on oilseed rape. As somebody who grows, or did grow rape in a high flea beetle area, I think now we probably have the technology to reduce our losses somewhat by playing with Clearfield. Because at least that means that you haven't put a residual on pre-emergent to scupper your chances of a different following break crop. You can wait till something comes through. If it's weeds, no rape. You've only a small loss in terms of seed. You can follow on with an alternative break crop. Otherwise, your rotation is scuppered, and you've got to wait till the spring before you play with anything else.
Yeah, let's say the Clearfield technology is good there. I'm sure that you can learn outside the room here. You can go and learn about it. It is good, and I think a lot of the concerns about Clearfield early on in its life was that the other agronomic things such as disease control, lodging, vigour, etc. The varieties weren't up to it. There are some very, very good varieties now out there that perform equally as well as your current non-Clearfield varieties.